My name is Paidipati. I'm here at Uptime Institute. I head up our work in the sustainability space. Prior to coming to Uptime, I was in IBM's, I was their global energy manager, heading up energy procurement and management globally. And probably a good chunk of my time was spent procuring renewable energy, a good chunk of which was in Europe. And then prior to that, I was in consulting for many years, and worked on renewable energy I've been in renewable energy probably for about 20 years, and did various things in the space. But part of that was supporting transactions, about 2 gigawatts worth, as a independent engineer, owner's engineer, or running procurements for utilities. So I've had the great opportunity and very fortunate to see the renewable energy industry develop over many years. And I think it's an interesting time in Europe. So let's dig into what's happening, why is it happening, and what can we all do going forward. So as I said, we're going to talk about what's driving additional interest in renewable energy for those companies, those data center operators that are not already procuring, some of the challenges we're seeing right now, and then some thoughts on what we can do going forward. All right, so driver number one. So hopefully you've all seen the Energy Efficiency Directive recast, as it were, that was published a few weeks ago. And in there are several things, there's many things that need to be reported at the facility level to the member country. And included in there, this is from a recent blog we did on this, there's several things that data center operators have to report at the facility level. So this is interesting because historically, many companies report their renewable energy usage, right, in their annual sustainability report. But it's usually, in a few instances, I've seen some companies report at the data center level, but in general, it's at the corporate level and it's high level. Now, with the Energy Efficiency Directive, we are going to have to report at the data center level things like total renewable energy consumption, how many guarantees of origin you're purchasing to back the renewable energy consumption, if you have a power purchase agreement, and then if you have on-site renewable energy. And these are things that the data center operator has to report up to its member country. And then thus far, and this is the EU level requirements. It's up to each country to interpret this. If you've seen the EEA, which has been published in Germany, they have some of these elements, and the EEA actually goes on further and requires a certain level of renewable energy procurement, 50% renewable energy by a certain date, and then eventually 100% renewable energy. So this is, I would say, unprecedented globally. I've never seen this before, of requiring at the facility level to report renewable energy usage. So I think for companies that are not buying renewable energy, one, in putting this data together, I'm sure it's going to have to be reviewed by some sort of compliance group. There's going to be a lot of questions asked internally. Why aren't we buying renewable energy? Well, how come we're only at X%? And so I think this is going to generate a lot of interest internally. And then our understanding is that it's a few years away before this things like the renewable energy factor is going to be public. But at some point, there's going to be a public database of these things, and so then a lot of stakeholders maybe not in the industry but external industry, are going to say, well, why aren't you doing more facility XYZ? So I think this is going to drive a lot more interest. Similarly, and so we're going to see over the coming months, the first reporting dates for the EED are supposed to be in May. Thus far, only Germany, I believe, has published their country level interpretation of it. And so we're going to see how this develops over the coming months, if there's any additional things that countries add, like Germany did, or not. So it's going to be there's going to be a lot of change over the coming months in terms of scrutiny at the data center level. Similarly, this is at a higher level, and there's several things going on like this. I talk about the CSRD here. Just it was 2 days ago. GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, they published a draft climate, a revised climate, and then an energy disclosure framework. Not everybody reports through GRI, but that's another example of other disclosure requirements. And if you read, it's very long. It's like 1,000 pages long. So I don't know if you have the time for that, but if you dig into the RD reporting requirements. This is a screenshot from the ESRS, Environmental Sustainability Reporting Standards, that back up the CSRD. Deep within there is a requirement that companies report their energy mix. So historically, so this is interesting because historically, as I said, it was voluntary. Companies typically, if you're doing some kind of sustainability disclosure, would present report the volume of renewable energy procured, or maybe the percent renewable energy that they're procuring. This now requires companies to divulge their energy mix. So having to say what percentage comes from coal, what percentage comes from natural gas, et cetera. So this is pretty interesting. Not too many companies do this today. And this is for CSRD, this is going, and this is at the company level, I should say that. This is at the company level. It's not at the facility level, but I believe this will also generate a lot of interest, both internally in a compliance review and then externally going up, saying, well, why aren't we a company doing this? So this is going to create some more interest, I think, in renewable energy. So that, and like I said, there's lots more disclosure requirements coming. This is just an example for that. Now, the third driver, and certainly not the least, is clients are asking for it. Every year for the last 2 years, Uptime, in our annual global survey, we've asked the question, in the past 2 years, there has been an increase in customers asking for environmental footprint metrics of our products and services. And in our most recent survey, the answer was 80% of companies said, yes, we are seeing more over the last 2 years. And so the companies we talk to say, yeah, we're hearing it from, first and foremost, our clients, whether it be service providers from their clients or enterprise customers from their internal clients, the internal workload they're serving in the company. A lot of interest in there. A lot of data center operators I talk to say, yeah, our upper management or our chief sustainability officer or something like that is saying, listen, what are you doing with renewable energy? Are you buying more? How can we help you? Investors are wanting to make sure that they're investing in companies that have that are driving it. Regulators, obviously, I just presented several slides on regulators, then employees. So kind of it's coming at it from both directions, right? So regulatorily being driven and asked about renewable energy. Also, the clients are asking about renewable energy. So those are pretty big drivers, I think. Then certainly an important one is financial reasons. So I'm sure many of you lived through the power crisis in 2022, and power prices went up to historical, once in a generation levels. I have here, this is from a nice report that Ember provides. They have a lot of great historical, this is day ahead market pricing, but day ahead market pricing isn't, if you were deciding 1 or 2 year contract in your retail isn't exactly what the price would be. But during the power crisis, obviously spot prices went up to 700-800 euros per megawatt hour. In Switzerland, I think it was 850. It was very, very high. It wasn't fun. 1 year, 2 year contract prices were going $200 or $300 a megawatt hour, up from 50 to 80 euros per megawatt hour just a year before. And during that time, what we saw was a lot of CFOs, maybe who I'm sure paid attention to the power bill, but all of a sudden we're like, well, what can we do? Can we bring this down? Can we manage this? And renewable energy is an opportunity to do that. Now, it depends on the contract vehicle, right? There's many ways to buy renewable energy that I'm sure lots of you are familiar with. But and if you do the right contract type, meaning you have something that's got fixed prices over a certain time, or maybe a fixed price with an adder for inflation adder, or whatever the case may be, that can help reduce volatility. Now, you can also just hedge your prices as well. That's a way to do it. But this renewable energy is a way to hedge your prices and help meet your sustainability goals at the same time. So this, I think, is going to drive a lot of interest for those companies. It has been, it has been driving lots of interest for companies that have not yet procured renewable energy. So those are the drivers. That's pretty exciting. Those are, I think, any company you're at, I think that's bound to get the attention of the decision makers to help move renewable energy forward. Now, what are the challenges? So it's pretty interesting. Every year, I guess in our climate change survey last year, we asked the question, in your organization, which are the greatest challenges to achieving your sustainability goals over the next 3 to 5 years? This is for data center operators. And very interestingly, so number one, obviously bringing down facility energy usage, especially if you have a legacy facility, that's a challenge. But the second biggest challenge was sourcing renewable energy. So I thought that was pretty interesting when I saw that data point. So let's maybe dig into what some of the challenges are. So first and foremost is a lot of companies don't know how much renewable energy they're using. So for the last few years, we just added renewable energy consumption this past year, but we've been asking companies, what data are you collecting right now? So, right, most companies are tracking power consumption, PUE, and this, I should say, this data is for global. It doesn't have a European snapshot, but the data I've seen for Europe, I think it's similar. Most companies are tracking PUE. Okay, minority are doing server utilization, but right now, only 34% of data center operators are tracking renewable energy consumption. So before you go, at least companies I've worked with and seen, before you go to buy renewable energy, you need to know how much you're using to know what your starting point is. And the challenge is, right, is it's not on the utility bill, perhaps. Maybe you're a client in a colo facility and you can't get that data. Maybe, not so much in Europe anymore, but maybe you're in a place where it's not easy to get that data from the utility, right? It's not published regularly. It's only published once a year. There's questions about how high quality it is. I've heard from a lot of data center operators that they don't know who in the company has the data, right? It shows up in an annual report, but we're not sure where it's coming from. So before you do so this is the first challenge we've seen is we don't know how much you're using. So that's a challenge that I think a lot of, especially in the light of the EED reporting requirements I showed a few slides back, I think this is a challenge that a lot of companies are going to have to overcome. Then the second challenge is the rules for what constitute renewable energy by different frameworks are changing. So this is an example. There's other examples, not necessarily renewable energy, but like, for example, the Science Based Targets Initiative changed the allowance of carbon credits for some of its programs. So it's a shifting landscape of the different frameworks for accounting for renewable energy, right? Renewable energy factor is pretty fixed, but what is renewable energy is slightly evolving. So this is one example. So some of you might be familiar with the RE100 program. Companies pledge to procure 100% renewable energy by a certain amount of time, and it's run by a nice organization, and they have a great technical guide. And in the technical guide, they for Europe say, okay, in Europe, there's a lot of interchange and physical interconnection and flow of electricity between countries. So what counts as renewable energy? And just at the end of 2022, they changed the rules. So historically, RE100, and again, this is for companies that have signed up to RE100, but I'll talk about the implications for everybody else in a second. They changed the rule. They changed the requirement. So prior to the end of last year, for RE100, most of Europe was considered one market. Because, like I said, if you've ever gone to the electricitymap.org or ENSO's data sets, there's a lot of flow of electricity between countries all the time. So it's a pretty open market. But at the end of last year, they changed the rules because some countries are not participating in in their Guarantee of Origin Registry program, the AIB, Association of Industry Bodies. I don't remember what AIB stands off the top of my head, but the group that certifies guarantees of origin. And so, and then obviously the UK left the European Union, or looking at the interconnection. So this is a pretty big deal. One, if companies, and there's some grandfathering clauses if historical contracts will move through, but it's an evidence of a shifting landscape which changes things, which makes it a challenge to know, well, what should we procure? How do we know what we're going to procure is going to meet the needs going forward. So if you're an RE100 participant, you can't, let's say you're in the UK or Ireland, you can't source renewable energy from other places. Or if I know for a time, renewable energy power purchase agreements sourced out of Poland were economically attractive, and so you could no longer do that. The implication from everybody else is it's an evolving supply and demand situation for the guarantees of origin, depending on where your facility is located. And so that can change the prices. So that leads me to the third challenge is, and this is from, I don't know if you've ever seen Edison Energy has a very nice quarterly renewable energy market briefing, and it includes a good chunk of it's dedicated to Europe. It's very nice. So, and this volatility isn't just driven by the changes from RE100, but in general, the challenge is if you're going to claim the emissions benefits of purchasing renewable energy, you have to purchase the energy attribute certificate, the guarantee of origin associated with that renewable energy. And for context, maybe 5 years ago, the cost of one guarantee of origin is equivalent to the purchase of 1 megawatt hour of electricity. We're in the neighborhood, 79 cents, 75 cents, euro cents a megawatt hour. Pretty negligible compared to, the overall power price of $50, $60, $70, $80 per megawatt hour. What I saw was pretty easy for most companies to say, you know what, CFO or whomever is controlling my budget, let's go ahead and tack this on. We need it. It's the right thing to do. Now, through a variety of reasons, right? Just supply and demand, the stuff I talked about, RE100, what I've heard is much greater demand from corporate buyers, like all of us, that the price is going up. And so now, granted, this dotted line here is the UK one. This is pretty dramatic, but that's partially because the UK is no longer in the European Union, so its ability to trade renewable energy has gotten a little complicated. But outside of there, going from, like I said, it was 5 years, maybe 2019, 2020 was less than a €1 per megawatt hour. Now you're talking about 4 plus. That doesn't seem like a lot, but using it as an example of a 5 megawatt data center, or a data center averaging 5 megawatts of load, that's an extra $100K in operating expenses. I don't know about you, but that's most companies, that's not going to make you very popular when all of a sudden your costs to drive your sustainability and bring down your greenhouse gas emissions go up by $100,000. Now, granted, right, some companies might have long-term power purchase agreement, which is great, but a lot of companies that either are doing 1-year retail contracts or shorter-term renewable energy deals, all of a sudden the prices are going up, and this makes a challenge to get renewable energy approved, renewable energy purchases approved. Similarly, the cost of renewable energy has been going up. So there's a group called Level 10 Energy. They also have a very nice quarterly report that talks about what kind of contract prices they're seeing. And they have it, it's a very nice report, and it includes different technologies and timeframes and whatnot. But this data is from the middle of 2020 through last quarter. And there's a gap here. I think it's because there wasn't a ton of data to draw from. But in general, the prices of renewable energy are going up. This is, I believe, independent of the guarantee of origin stuff I showed on the previous slide. So rising prices make it a challenge, again, to get renewable energy projects approved. Now, why is this happening? I think it's a host of things, right? Early in the pandemic, there was some supply chain issues, so you couldn't get the right equipment for a renewable energy project. Lately, what I've heard is there's just a lot of demand for renewable energy. No surprise, given the power price things I showed, that more and more companies are establishing sustainability targets, and it's not easy to develop a renewable energy project. I know, even given the power crisis and everything, my understanding, there's still long queues and pipelines to get interconnection, get approvals, get permits, etc. So there's great demand for renewable energy, and the project supply isn't quite there. So prices are being driven up. Again, this makes the business case harder to get a project approved. So now somebody might be saying, well, Jay, this sounds pretty grim. What should we do? What should we do? So here's our thoughts on what to do. First, hope is not lost. There, in general, right? There's going to be exceptions. In general, if you renewable energy is in the long term going to be cheaper than grid power, right? And right, it varies on how sunny and windy it is, the economics of power where you are, but in general, it's going to be cheaper. Maybe not as cheap as you'd like, and but the fundamentals are there. But some things to think about to capture value. Number one, you got to be patient. Like I said, I've worked on several gigawatts worth of projects, and they never go as fast as anybody wants. You can't rush it. I've seen contracts fall apart because one party wanted to move too fast, or maybe or the industry or the market conditions were changing too fast. So number one, be patient. And you got to work with all your internal stakeholders. Say, you know what, this is going to take time. Now, in a perfect world, right, the best pricing I've ever seen is if you sign a 20-year renewable energy power purchase agreement. The problem is, I don't know too many data center operators that know what their load's going to be in 20 years. Full stop. Either it's going to grow, it's going to shrink. So I've seen for most companies, it's a challenge to sign long-term renewable energy power purchase agreements for that long. What we've seen is, and what I recommend is look at a 3 to 5 year planning horizon for your renewable energy purchasing. And certainly you can do 5-year, and I've had the opportunity to work on some projects like this, 5-year renewable energy PPAs in Europe. The ones I worked on were sleeved through the retail provider. But look at that for your data center. In general, I think most companies have a good horizon and understanding where load's going. If it's raising up, or maybe you're an enterprise and there's consolidation happening. Because the challenge is, if you sign a long-term agreement, certainly you can cancel the agreement, but you're going to pay a lot of money. You can do what's called assigning it. You can, let's say you sell your data center, you can move that contract over, but there's frankly legal fees associated with doing that. Or if your load doesn't grow as fast as you thought it was going to, you could pay penalties there. So what we found at Uptime is that 3 to 5 year time horizon is the sweet spot. Number 3, don't copy other people. We're in a very fortunate, right, that there's a lot of companies are sharing their renewable energy and their sustainability journey publicly, which is wonderful. I think we can all benefit from that. But copying exactly what another company is doing could create challenges for you, because there's risk associated with this. Every company's got different risk tolerance. Every company's got different access to data and resources, et cetera. So don't find something that works for you. Another thing to consider is, for those of you that are building data centers, obviously the availability of renewable energy is a decision criteria in the siting of most data centers. But I'd recommend just not at a country. Are we going to put our data center in, I don't know, Norway versus Spain versus France or something like that? But I would recommend go local, depending on the TSO, the Transmission Service Organization. They might have, excuse me, substation level pipelines of renewable energy, of what's coming, to know what's going to be there. Is there going to be projects you can contract with that are local to the facility? What's the prices happening in that region, right? As I showed on a couple of slides before, prices are going up, but in that region, are they going down? Are they going up? You might need to engage an advisor to figure that out. But I would say go detailed, look local. Then some other ideas is have a short list maybe of companies. Presumably you're going to do an RFP for this. However, you want to do it. If you want to do a direct PPA, sleeve PPA, virtual power purchase agreement, there's many ways to procure renewable energy in Europe. But I'd recommend getting a short list together, right? It's not hard. Data centers are large buyers of energy. I've never met a renewable energy provider that didn't want to talk to a data center operator about the opportunity. So it's pretty easy to get meetings with companies, and either you do it yourself, or there's a lot of great, especially in Europe right now, a lot of great advisory firms that will help you run an RFP if you want to. But I'd say find companies that have the products that need use, because not everybody's offering every type of power purchase agreement. Not every company is going to give you the terms you want, which leads to the second item on the slide. Don't be afraid to ask for what you want. If you want I don't know, 6-year power purchase agreement, because that's the horizon and that's what your CFO is going to do, and you want, I don't know, you want the guarantee of origin price fixed and you want the power price fixed, ask for it. In general, right, most renewable energy developers and those types of companies are offering kind of packaged products, typically 10 years or greater, with some risk sharing, but that might not work for you. So I'd say ask for it. No, I mean, somebody might say no, but I like I said, data centers use a lot of energy and are very stable, great customers. So I think if you ask for it, there's a good chance you can get it. You might now the challenge is you might have to pay a little more, right? We're not talking double, it's a few percentage more is what I've seen, but you got to ask. When it comes to where's my renewable energy and where are my guarantees of origin coming from, right? As I showed a few slides ago with that RE100 change, and there's also a very nice white paper that Google's done on the subject of what is local renewable energy. I would look at that. Of all the places in the world, and I've had the opportunity to work in a good chunk of the world, the question of what is local and what counts as local renewable energy in Europe is one of the most complicated places because, as I said, there's so much exchange of energy between countries, right? And a lot of places in the world, by and large, the renewable energy, the flow of electricity is constrained to that country. But in Europe, it's a little different. So I would say I would err on the side of caution. Like I showed on the RE100, that changed. I know I've heard other frameworks are thinking about changing. Other stakeholder groups are saying, wait a minute, your facilities in, I don't know, southern Portugal, and you're buying renewable energy from Norway. Is that electron from Norway really getting to your facility in southern Portugal? I would err on the side of caution, right? Now the challenge is that the economics vary by country, but I would err on the side of caution. And then last but not least, projects are complicated. Make sure, and I would say, no matter how you buy power, right? If you're doing kind of passive power procurement, or you're doing active, or you're riding the spot market, that's getting more complicated. But doing renewable energy is a layer on top of that maybe not every power manager, what have you, would have. So I would say make sure you allocate resources, and once your company sets a sustainability goal or sets a renewable energy goal or a greenhouse gas reduction goal, it's not going to go away. You could, right, sign a 20-year power purchase agreement and be done with it for 20 years. That a lot of companies haven't done that. So this is going to require some ongoing active management of, okay, what projects do we have? What projects do we need? For all the data and disclosure things I mentioned a few slides before, are we getting the data from our renewable energy project? Have they sent their certificate for the guarantee of origin? How much are we paying? What happened with the price? So this requires some active management. So make sure you have resources, whether it be internally or you bring in a company, whatever the case may be, to manage that. So those are the thoughts we've had on how to manage all the changes. As I said, there's a lot of great drivers. A lot of data is going to be reported publicly. So there's going to be a lot of internal and external questions about renewable energy. The economics situation, now it's gotten better, right? I showed that chart. Power prices are still not what I would call low. You're talking about 100 plus euros per megawatt hour for the supply. That's not what I would call cheap, but they've stabilized. But in general, renewable energy is cheaper than that. So the economics clients are asking for. But the challenges, as I said, are Projects are complicated. Not every organization has the data to get started to figure this out. And then the economics are changing. So with that, I think we have 10 minutes for Q&A. Is that right?
Hello. More or less, yeah. I've got a question from the audience, if I can just squeeze that in before we move on.
Sure.
But just first, thank you so much for that, Jay. That was excellent. And thank you, excuse me, for putting it across in a positive way when sometimes sustainability can be tricky to stay positive at the moment. Yeah. So just quickly, what would you consider the value proposition of buying renewable energy from an offsite operator versus installing on-site generation?
Ooh. In general, I haven't seen too many data. So that's a wonderful question that we get a lot, and I've dealt with in my own work in the space. So there's pros and cons, but one of the challenges is, in general, unless you happen to have a lot of land next to your data center, the average data center doesn't have enough physical space to install renewable energy on site to meet all of its needs. Mm-hmm. Now, the advantages are usually you get pretty good economics on site. And so it's there, it's physical, it's a 20-year contract. So it's going to be there for a long time. It's visible. We've seen it's a very qualitative thing, but over time, seen a lot of companies get marketing benefits. You can bring your clients and say, look, we got solar panels. And while from a quantitative point of view, you're only maybe serving 10% of your data center's load, it still gives you that. The challenges are you got to put... I found a lot of hesitancy putting it on the roof of a data center, just concerns about leakage and stuff. It does take time and effort. You, the data center operator, typically have to engage the planning authorities, get the permits, whatever the case may be. Offsite, you can meet all of your power needs. The economics are a little more variable. The on-site power is usually the economics are a function of the cost of the equipment and supply and demand. Off-site, you're starting to get involved in the power market prices and how does that change, and that's evolving. But the pros are you don't have to do anything physically in your building. So all of a sudden, it's a contractual thing. It's not a physical, engineering project that takes people and time. And I remember I was working on a project and we had to use up half the parking lot. Well, to stage it right, nobody wants to have to park somewhere else. So then they're calling you and say, well, when's the project going to be done? So there's those on-site logistics that you have to deal with that when you do off-site. And so those are the pros and cons. And I think every company needs to evaluate those pros and cons for themselves. Yeah.
Thank you. And just quickly, that the CSRD earlier that you mentioned and other directives, how will that be enforced? And is it enforced? And what's the time frame on those kind of directives?
The EED. So wonderful question. For the EED, it's a little still up in the air. So the EED, the data as proposed has to be reported starting in May of next year.
Right. Okay.
So pretty soon, the enforcement mechanisms is up to each country. Now, Germany is the only one that has published their rules, and they are levying heavy fines for not complying. I think what I saw was 100,000 euros.
Yes,
for not complying. So it's pretty. That's real money, right?
Substantial, yeah.
And so, no other countries announced their rules yet. So that's what the enforcement mechanism. The CSRD, I'm not as familiar with that. That's that's a much higher level. I think there's similar levels of enforcement. It's the same as not disclosing your company's annual revenue and stuff like that. It's a similar thing. I have not seen the enforcement mechanism or the penalties. That's a great question. I'll take a look at that.
Okay, so that's interesting. That is the sort of penalty that people are going to be paying attention to. That's
it's not like it's not a rounding error. It's real. It's real money. Yeah.
Okay, Jay, we do have to move on to the next section. But again, thank you so much. That was really interesting.